They flooded my workshop, so I shut off the water to their country club. And yeah, if you say it like that, it sounds petty, like some HOA soap opera where everybody needs a hobby and a therapist. But I swear to you, it didn't feel petty when I was standing ankle deep in brown, stinking water watching 10 years of my life rust in real time. And the worst part wasn't even the damage. It was the way they looked me in the eye and acted like it didn't matter, like my livelihood was just acceptable collateral, a rounding error on their little spreadsheet of community improvements. I live about 40 minutes north of Charlotte, just outside this gated place called Briar Glen Estates. Big stone entrance hedges clipped so sharp they look like they've been shaved, and a golf course wrapped around the neighborhood like a green ribbon somebody paid extra for. I'm not inside their gates. Never wanted to be. My family's place has been here since the 70s, back when this area was more red clay and creek beds than luxury amenities. My dad built my workshop with his own hands, a simple cedar structure, tin roof, wide double doors that open out to the pasture. And if you've ever had a building like that, you know it's not just lumber and nails, it's memory. It's where I learned to square a board, sharpen a chisel, fix what other people toss because it's easier to buy new than to care. A few months back, I walked out there early one morning and caught a smell that hit me before I even touched the door, wet wood, sour and heavy like something had been trapped and rotting. At first, I figured maybe I'd left a window cracked and we'd gotten one of those sideways summer storms that sneaks in under your guard. It happens. But when I grabbed the handle and pulled the door, it didn't swing like it always does. It dragged like it was stuck on something. I pushed harder, got it open, stepped inside, and my boot sank. Not into mud outside, not into some little puddle by the threshold, into water, standing water, across the entire floor. I just froze listening. That quiet lapping sound against metal legs and plastic bins, like the building was breathing wrong. My table saw was half submerged, the cast iron top already blooming orange like rust was growing in fast forward. My hand planes were floating in a tote that had tipped over, bobbing like sad little boats. Lumber I'd been curing for a custom dining table, good wood, expensive wood, was warped and swollen like it had given up on being straight ever again. You ever have that moment where your brain refuses to catch up with what your eyes are seeing? Like reality's running ahead and you're stuck buffering. That was me standing there thinking, this isn't real, this is a mistake, this is something small, a leak, a busted hose, anything. But the longer I stood there, the more it settled in my chest. This wasn't small. This was a decision someone made. It took me 2 days to pump it out. My neighbor Walt came over with a sump pump and a six-pack. Didn't say much, just shook his head in that way Southern men do when they want to swear, but also want to keep their blood pressure under control. When the floor finally dried enough that I could walk without leaving footprints like a crime scene, the damage was obvious. Thousands of dollars in tools, months of work. The kind of loss that doesn't just hit your wallet, it hits your gut. At first I blamed bad luck. Maybe a pipe burst underground. Maybe the creek behind my property overflowed. So I started walking the perimeter, following the slope of the land the way you do when you're trying to solve something you don't want to believe. That's when I saw it. A ditch. Fresh cut. Soil still loose and red like it had been turned recently, and it ran from the stormwater culvert behind Briar Glen's 12th fairway straight down the incline and emptied real convenient into the low spot behind my shop. I crouched down and touched the dirt. Soft. New. This wasn't erosion. This wasn't nature doing what nature does. Trenches don't dig themselves. I'm not the conspiracy type. I build cabinets, not cases. But the angle of that trench, the way it lined up like an arrow aimed at my building, made my stomach twist. So I started making calls, county office, water management, even a guy I know who does grading work around town. And over the next week, the accident turned into a pattern. Briar Glen had been having drainage issues on the back nine. Heavy rain would pool near the green, slow play mess, with tee times cost them money. So the HOA board approved what they called a runoff optimization project. Sounds clean, doesn't it? Like they're recycling or planting trees. What it meant was they redirected the excess stormwater toward the lowest adjacent property, mine. So I called the HOA president, Russell Davenport, retired banker type. Always in a pressed polo, even on weekends, the kind of man who looks like he sleeps in khakis. We'd spoken maybe twice before, both times polite enough. I tried to keep my voice steady. Russell, did your board approve a drainage change that directs water onto my land? There was a pause. I could hear paper shuffling, that little theater some people do to make it sound like they're being thorough. Then he says, it's within community guidelines. I'm not part of your community. Another pause, shorter, colder. It's stormwater, Nathan. It's natural runoff. You'll be fine. You'll be fine. Like he was talking about a wet lawn chair, not the building my dad built with his hands. I looked out at my workshop while he said it. Warped beams rusted, saw my dad's old lathe sitting there like it had aged 10 years overnight. It cost me everything in that building, I said. He sighed like I'd interrupted his lunch. With all due respect, your structure sits at a lower elevation. Water flows downhill. That's not our fault. Now here's the thing, water does flow downhill, but trenches don't appear by magic. I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back, and for the next couple days I paced around like a dog that can't find the fence line, angry. Yeah, but also embarrassed. Like somehow I should have seen this coming, like I was naive for assuming rich folks behind gates would ever think about the guy outside them. That's when something clicked in the back of my mind, quiet at first, then louder. The pond. There's a pond that sits right along the property line between my land and Briar Glen's course. It's been there longer than both of us. My dad used to fish it with me on Sunday mornings, early mist hovering over the water, quiet enough you could hear the line sing. When the developers bought the adjacent acreage decades ago, they asked if they could draw irrigation water from it. Back then it was a handshake deal. My dad was trusting like that, no paperwork, just neighborly goodwill. Over the years, Briar Glen expanded. Their sprinkler systems got fancy. They built a pump house, a small cinder block building near the water's edge, and I never thought much about it. Figured it was mutually beneficial. They kept the pond stable, we enjoyed the view, everybody wins. But standing there staring at my flooded shop, I finally asked myself something I should have asked a long time ago. Did they actually have any legal right to that water? That night I pulled out the old property surveys my dad kept in a metal filing cabinet, spread them across my kitchen table, traced boundary lines with my finger like I could feel the truth through ink. According to the map, about 70% of that pond sat on my land, and the pump house itself entirely on my side. I didn't sleep much. Around midnight, I was online reading about easements and water rights, my coffee going cold beside me. By 2 in the morning, I knew enough to feel dangerous. By the end of that week, the county records office confirmed it. No recorded easement, no formal agreement, just a decades-old understanding between men who shook hands instead of hiring lawyers. And one of those men was gone. I drove out to the pond the next morning and stood in front of that little pump house, beige paint-peeling hum from inside, water being pulled the same as it had been for years. I ran my hand along the metal door and felt something settle in my chest. Not rage exactly. Something colder, clearer. If water flows downhill, I thought, then so does leverage. That afternoon, I went to the hardware store and bought the heaviest steel lock they had, the kind that makes a sound when it hits the counter. I didn't sleep much the night before I put it on, not because I was unsure, but because I knew once I did it, there was no going back to polite nods across property lines. This wasn't going to be a quiet disagreement over grass clippings. This was going to hurt them. And when you decide to hurt people who are used to getting their way, you better be ready for what comes next. Early the next morning, I drove down to the pond with a thermos of coffee and that lock sitting on the passenger seat like it weighed 50 pounds. Sun was just coming up over the trees, mist hovering over the water the way it used to when my dad and I would fish. For a second, I hesitated. I could almost hear him in my head, telling me to think it through. Be neighborly. Don't burn bridges you might have to cross later. Then I pictured my workshop floor, the rust blooming across cast iron, and the way Russell had said, "You'll be fine." That hesitation burned right off. The pump house door had a simple latch. No lock, no chain, just assumption. I slid the shackle through, snapped it shut, and stood there listening to the click echo inside that cinder block box. It sounded final. I didn't cut power. Didn't smash anything. Didn't damage a single wire. I just denied access to a structure sitting on my property. Then I went home and got back to work cleaning tools that might still be salvageable, because anger doesn't stop, corrosion oil and elbow grease do. By mid-afternoon, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I already knew. This is Russell Davenport. Of course it was. Our ground supervisor is telling me the irrigation system isn't drawing water. That's correct, I said, wiping oil onto a hand plane that was probably beyond saving anyway. There appears to be a lock on the pump house. There was silence, not confusion, not surprise. Calculation. You can't interfere with essential infrastructure, he said, like he was reading from a script. I'm not interfering with anything, I replied. I secured a building on my land. He tried to keep his voice calm, but I could hear the edge. That water service is for a private course with contractual obligations to members. And my workshop service is my livelihood, I said. You want to talk obligations? Start with the ditch that turned my shop into a bathtub. He exhaled sharply. Nathan, let's not escalate this. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the nerve of the word escalate, like I was the one who brought a shovel to somebody else's property. You redirected drainage onto my land and flooded my building, I said. That was escalation. That project was fully compliant with county code. Does county code say you get to drown your neighbor? His voice cooled. Stormwater management is complex. If you have a grievance, submit it formally. I will, I said, along with an invoice. He hung up. The first day their sprinklers didn't run, most people probably didn't notice. Late spring grass still holding moisture. But by day 2, their neon green started dulling. By day 3, you could see faint yellowing around the edges of the fairways, the kind of imperfection that makes people in gated communities act like the sky is falling. Walt called me that evening. You shut him off, didn't you?
Yep.
He whistled low. That's bold. I just hope you've got a lawyer. I do, I said. And I did. Carla Ruiz, local land use attorney, not flashy, not loud, just sharp in that quiet way that makes you feel safer the longer she's talking. I brought her everything: survey maps, photos of the flood damage tool estimates, screenshots of drainage approvals. She flipped through it all, leaned back, and said plain as day, they don't have an easement. And if the pump house is fully on your parcel, you have every right to control access. What about prescriptive rights? I asked, repeating phrases I'd picked up in my midnight research. Adverse use. She gave this half smile like she'd heard every version of this story. They'd have to prove continuous hostile use without permission. From what you're telling me, this was consensual. A handshake agreement isn't the same as surrendering ownership, so I can keep it locked. You can, she said, but they're going to push back. Push back turned out to be a polite way of saying they were about to lose their minds. By the end of the week, the course looked stressed, not dead, but struggling. Members complained the greens were running slow. Some out-of-town guests posted a photo online comparing Briar Glen to late August in Arizona, and if you want to watch wealthy people panic, just start threatening their image. Then the letter arrived. Cease and desist. Heavy legal language accusing me of unlawful interference, demanding immediate restoration of water access, threatening damages. I read it twice at my kitchen table, then slid it over to Carla. She didn't flinch. We respond calmly. So we did. My response letter was shorter. It included a detailed invoice for the flood damage with photos and replacement costs, and here's where Carla really earned her money. It also itemized years of water usage based on estimated irrigation draw at standard commercial rates. In other words, you've been pulling water from my land for decades with nothing but a handshake. And you just proved you don't respect handshakes anymore. We requested drainage remediation and compensation within 30 days. The total at the bottom wasn't small. Russell called again and skipped the pleasantries. This is extortion. It's accounting, I said. You're attempting to leverage an unrelated issue. Unrelated, I repeated. Your ditch sent water into my building. That was stormwater, he snapped. Your sprinklers run on pond water. Funny how water is natural runoff when it's ruining my life, I said, but it's essential infrastructure when it's keeping your grass pretty. He tried a new angle. Guilt. You're harming dozens of homeowners who have nothing to do with this. And that one almost got me because he wasn't entirely wrong. There were families in those houses who didn't sit in board meetings or vote on drainage plans. They just paid dues and trusted the board to handle things. But then I looked at the photos of my shop again. I didn't vote on flooding my own property either. I said quieter. Week 2, the course was visibly suffering. They tried rationing running pumps at odd hours, but without access to the intake system, they were stuck. I later learned they even tried drilling a temporary well, didn't yield enough. That's when I made the next move. And this is where people either nod and go fair, or they call me the villain. I lowered the pond level. Not dramatically, not to drain it dry, just back to its natural creek-fed height. For years, they'd kept it slightly elevated for pump pressure. On my side, there's an outflow gate. With a few adjustments, I let it return to baseline. The effect was immediate. Even if they got inside, there wouldn't have been enough volume to sustain their full irrigation cycle. The following Monday, water trucks started showing up, big stainless tankers, rumbling through their manicured entrance hoses, snaking across cart paths like veins. The optics alone were brutal. Walt sent me a photo members in polos standing with arms crossed watching hired drivers spray what used to flow freely. Caption said, "Guess paradise needs a refill." I won't lie, there was satisfaction in that. Not joy, more like balance. Like the universe had finally stopped leaning only one direction. But it wasn't all victory laps. There were nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd gone too far, wondering what my dad would have done. He believed in compromise. He also believed in not being walked on. Both things can be true, and it'll still keep you up at night. The real turning point came when the HOA invited me to an emergency meeting at their clubhouse. I almost didn't go. Why would I walk into a room full of people who already decided I'm the problem? Carla insisted. You should, she said. Let them see you as a person, not a nuisance. The clubhouse looked like money trying to smell like lemon cleaner hardwood floors, framed tournament photos that soft lighting meant to make everyone look calm and successful. The room was half full when I walked in. Russell stood near the front, jaw tight. When they opened the floor, he gestured toward me like I was a guest speaker. Nathan has concerns about our drainage project, he said, carefully neutral. I stood up slow, feeling every eye on me. I don't have concerns, I said. I have damage. And I told them the truth. I described opening the workshop door, my boot sinking the quiet lapping sound against tools I'd saved for worked for inherited. I passed around photos, not dramatic, just factual, rust on cast iron, warped wood, a lathe that used to be my dad's sitting ruined. You could feel the room shift. Not everyone, some people were still mad because their fairways were turning ugly, but a few homeowners looked genuinely uncomfortable, like they'd just learned what their board was capable of doing to someone outside the gates. A woman raised her hand. Why didn't the board inform adjacent property owners before altering runoff? Russell cut in fast. The project complied with all regulatory requirements. That's not what she asked, I said, and I didn't even raise my voice. I didn't have to. The room got quiet in that way where you can hear someone swallow. Then another guy spoke up, and here's the twist I didn't expect, because I assumed this room would be a wall of loyalty. Is it true the pump house is on his land? Russell hesitated just a second, but everybody saw it. He tried to dress it up. The structure predates current survey interpretations, which was a fancy way of saying, yeah, it's on my property. And right there you could feel their confidence crack. Because it's one thing to be mad at a guy for locking a door. It's another to realize your HOA has been operating on handshakes and assumptions while making aggressive, expensive decisions that expose everyone to liability. By the end of that meeting, the mood wasn't fully on my side, but it wasn't blind loyalty to Russell anymore either. And let me tell you, 3 months of hauling water will humble just about anybody. It's expensive. Refunds are expensive. Reputation damage is expensive. And once their perfect brochure illusion starts peeling, suddenly fixing my workshop starts looking cheaper than pretending nothing happened. By the time summer hit, Briar Glen didn't look glossy anymore. Not dead, but stressed. Greens lost that velvet sheen, yellow patches that never quite bounced back, and those water trucks kept coming morning and afternoon like a loud rolling reminder that somebody had pushed too far. What a lot of people don't understand about places like that is the illusion matters almost as much as the grass. It's not just a golf course, it's property values, status, the idea that everything inside those gates is curated and controlled and better than whatever sits outside. And there I was, the guy outside the gates holding the valve. About 10 weeks in, Carla called me. They've reached out, she said, through lawyers, through accountants. That's when I knew it was real. We met at a neutral office downtown, not the clubhouse, not my kitchen table, a gray conference room with a long glass table that made every movement echo. Russell was there, but he didn't look as polished. The tan from his tea times had faded. There were lines around his eyes I hadn't noticed before. 2 other board members sat beside him, one flipping through a binder thick with invoices. No one smiled. One of their attorneys cleared his throat. We're prepared to discuss resolution. I'm listening, I said. They started with numbers, water trucking, costs, lost revenue from canceled events, member refunds. They were bleeding. Then they shifted to my workshop like they were offering charity. We're willing to fund reconstruction. The attorney said materials replacement of damaged equipment at fair market value. Not fair market, I cut in calm as I could manage. Replacement value. He glanced at Russell. I continued. And the drainage needs to be corrected. No more redirected runoff. Russell finally spoke. Re-engineering that system will be expensive. So was flooding my building, I said. There was a long pause, the kind where you can almost hear calculators running in people's heads deciding what's cheaper, doing the right thing, or continuing a war they're losing. Then the attorney asked, carefully, "And the pond?" "We draft a formal lease," I said. 25 years, annual payment upfront indexed for inflation. Access terms clearly defined. Maintenance responsibilities spelled out. Miss a payment, access is revoked. Russell's jaw tightened. "You're asking us to sign away leverage." I held his gaze. "You dug a trench." I didn't shout. I didn't need to. The fact hung in the air like humidity. They asked for a break. Stepped into the hallway. Through the glass wall, I watched them argue in low voices, hands moving, frustration in their faces. Carla leaned toward me. "If they walk, this drags out," she said. "You ready for that?" I thought about my dad's shop smell, cedar and oil and summer air. I thought about standing in dirty water being told I'd be fine. "I'm ready," I said. 10 minutes later, they came back. "We agree in principle," the attorney said. It took another month to finalize everything. Engineers assessed the drainage redesign. Contractors drew plans for my new workshop. Insurance adjusters poked around. Accountants fought over line items like it was a sport. But eventually construction started. The old structure had to come down. I stood there the day they tore it apart, boards coming off one by one, and it hit me harder than I expected, watching the building my dad built disappear. But it also felt honest. That version of it had been compromised the moment water soaked into its foundation. The new shop went up stronger, treated lumber, reinforced concrete, proper grading, so water would never pool there again. French drain sump backups, all the stuff I never thought I'd need until somebody decided my land was their solution. They replaced every major tool, brand new table saw with fresh cast iron, gleaming a new lathe smoother than my old one ever was, planers and jointers and hand tools still smelling like factory oil. The first morning I walked into the finished shop. The light came through the windows just right, hit the workbench top, bounced back warm and clean. The air smelled like fresh-cut cedar again. I stood there longer than I meant to, not because I'd won, but because something in me had shifted. A week later, the lease agreement got signed. 25 years. Annual payment wired every January 1st. The first payment hit before the ink was fully dry. The pump house door now has 2 locks, mine and theirs. Access defined by schedule. Usage capped by volume. Everything documented. No more handshakes. Briar Glen's irrigation came back online slowly. You could see the course recover over the next few weeks, color returning like someone turning up saturation in real life. The water trucks stopped. The complaints faded. From the road, if you drive past today, you'd never know anything happened. Perfect greens, clean fairways, golf carts gliding around like nothing ever went wrong. But I know. Every time I walk into my workshop and run my hand across that new table saw, I remember standing in dirty water being told it was just storm water. I remember being dismissed like my work didn't count. And I remember the click of that lock, how small it sounded, and how big it turned out to be. Russell and I don't talk much now. When we cross paths, it's civil, polite nods, short sentences. Not friendship, not open hostility. Just awareness. A few homeowners have stopped by over the past year. Some apologized quietly for how it went down. A couple admitted they didn't even know about the drainage change until that meeting. One guy thanked me, said the whole ordeal forced the board to be more transparent. I don't know if that's true. HOAs have long memories and short tempers, but I do know this. Power doesn't always look like shouting or lawsuits or dramatic standoffs. Sometimes it looks like reading your own property survey at 2 a.m, coffee cold, eyes burning, realizing you've been giving away something that's yours because you assumed goodwill was enough. Sometimes it looks like understanding exactly where your boundaries are legally and otherwise and deciding you're not going to let somebody redraw them because it's convenient. Would my dad have handled it differently? Maybe. He grew up when a handshake meant something, but he also taught me to take care of what's yours, protect your work, stand steady when someone bigger tries to lean on you. I didn't ruin their course. I didn't sabotage anything. I simply stopped giving away what was mine, especially after they decided my loss was acceptable. And here's the part that stuck with me, the lesson I didn't want but probably needed. Some people will call you neighbor, right up until it costs them something, and the second it does, they'll treat you like a line on a map, a low spot, an inconvenience. Kindness is real, sure, but paperwork is realer. Boundaries aren't just fences and property lines, they're how you teach people what they're allowed to do to you. Now, every January 1st, my phone buzzes with a payment confirmation. I don't celebrate. I don't gloat. I just file it and go back to work because at the end of the day, I'm a woodworker. I build things meant to last. And sometimes when someone tries to wash your life away and tells you you'll be fine, the only answer is to show them exactly what fine looks like on your terms. So let me ask you something I still go back and forth on because I know people have opinions about this. Was I justified? Was it a fair balance or did I let pride push it too far? If you were in my boots watching your livelihood rust because somebody wanted greener grass, would you have done the same? Or would you have handled it differently? Drop your thoughts, seriously. I read more of them than you'd think, and I'm curious where you land when it comes to neighbors' power and that thin line between justice and revenge. And if you've ever dealt with HOA drama, property line battles, or that moment where you realize you're done being pushed around, tell your story too, because sometimes the quiet guy outside the gates has the longest memory, and sometimes karma shows up wearing work boots.